Okay, everybody, let's get going with today's L10 webinar, the ROI Illusion, Ditching Vanity Metrics for Real Outcomes, sponsored by Learn to Win. My name is Tim Sosby. I'm editorial director for L10. It's my pleasure to welcome you today and to serve as a host of our webinar. And I'm going to start with some housekeeping items here. We're planning a 30-minute session for you today. Your phones are on mute, but we'd still love to hear from you. If you have any questions, any comments along the way, please do enter them in. You can use the chat window or you can use the Q&A window. And again, we'd love to hear from you throughout today's program while your thoughts are fresh in your mind. Today's webinar is being recorded. Will be available on demand on the L10 website. I'm going to share an address with you for our on-demand and upcoming webinars later in today's program. I'm also going to send you a follow-up email tomorrow, a link a day after today's program ends, with a direct link to the recording. So you'll be able to find that recording of today's program today on the L10 website or tomorrow through that email. And certainly feel free to share with your colleagues. And speaking of sharing, a follow-up survey is going to appear on a separate browser window when we leave here today. I would love to have you look for that survey when you leave today and quickly share your thoughts with us. We always appreciate your feedback. And along those lines, there's my email address. You can reach me. I'll share that later in today's program as well. Don't hesitate to reach out if I can help with anything. All right, with all of that said, I'm going to turn things over to our speakers today. You're going to be hearing from Brett Kramer, Vice President of Commercial Sales for Learn to Win, and Matthew Yesko, Strategic Advisor for Aquinas Leadership Group. Brett and Matthew, thank you both for joining us today, and over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining today's Fireside Chat. We're going to talk a little bit about measuring what matters and transforming learning metrics for business impact. As Tim mentioned, I'm Brett Kramer, Vice President of Commercial Sales for Learn to Win. And just a brief history on Learn to Win, so you're aware. We are a readiness platform for learning and started in the sports area, athletics area, from founding out of a walk-on at the University of North Carolina's basketball team that was struggling to learn the playbook. And he had a roommate that was focused on education, and they got together, and that's kind of the genesis of where we came from. If you're familiar with the national champion Michigan Wolverines, they won the national championship a year before last. They were using Learn to Win while they did that and continue to do so today. I have a lot of success in the athletic space and really have moved that into a lot of success with the military. The DoD recognized from a readiness perspective what we were doing in athletics and realized how important readiness is for them. We're now very involved in multiple branches of the military and are available for impact levels 3, 4, and even up to 6. So very nice in the security space as well, which leads us into the enterprise and commercial space. We've done very well with a number of organizations from the pharmaceutical, the life sciences space, broader life sciences space, as well as insurance, finance, etc. Matthew, if you could you tell us a little bit about yourself and also about Aquinas Leadership Group?
Absolutely. We're training experts. That's it. And we focus on changing business outcomes. We have a really deep knowledge of the influence process because for the most part, in the areas that we play in, we are teaching physics to poets. We need salespeople to sell to drive business impact, or MSLs to drive a business impact, or patient services, whatever it might be, to change the business. We're really strong supporters of taking a very scientific and proven approach towards learning. And if you're going to take a scientific approach, measurement is key to that. And everything you see across the bottom is stuff that our team is working on today. So there's a lot of different levers that we like to pull. And part of the way that we figure out what is the right lever to pull is measurement. So I'm glad we're having this conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what we're here for. We're going to try to cover 3 areas really of measurement, kind of traditional learning metrics and how we're often misled by those, how to implement a more effective measurement strategy, and then we'll look at some real results. So with that, Matthew, why don't you talk a little bit about what you always call the metrics mirage?
Yeah, I love that phrase. And if you think about sort of the idea of a mirage, you're in the desert, you don't have anything, you see something off in the distance that looks really promising, and you walk towards it, and it turns out that it's just more nothing. And that's why I think that I love that idea of a metrics mirage. I think most organizations do at some point in time suffer from that metrics mirage, which is like this sense of satisfaction, this false sense of satisfaction that comes from measuring things like, did they complete the course or did they reach a certain score? But I think that looking at those types of metrics actually causes a couple of problems. Number one, they don't measure what matters. Like at the end of the day, if someone doesn't pass a test that is related to a competitive area, let's say, and it's not something that's compliance related, but they're incredible salespeople. Like, does that metric matter? Does the thing that we're measuring matter? By the flip side, can we even figure out what metrics that matter? Secondly, the metrics aren't connected to the business outcomes. So do I understand if someone can pass this test or if this person can complete this course? Does it change the business impact? And the third is they actually, I think the metrics mirage encourages the wrong behaviors. Like when we focus on things like, did they like the course? Did we achieve high levels of acceptance that they like the course? Oh, okay, that's great that they liked the course. What if they didn't like the course, but they were better salespeople? Is that a bad course? And so I think it can encourage some of the bad behavior.
Yeah, that's great. I've loved that metrics mirage saying since the first time I heard you say it. It really kind of brings it right to your head. You kind of get it right from there. Can you give an example of how that's played out in a real organization?
Absolutely. So we were working with an organization, it was a pharmaceutical company, 98% completion of the course, and the courses were really highly rated. We're talking like 4.8 or higher on a 5-point scale. So on paper, incredible. When you dug a little deeper, what we found is that the reps were still struggling with some basic messaging. They completed the course, they liked the course, they were unable to deliver what they needed. And that's a great example of a metrics mirage. What they were looking at, completion, and whether or not they liked it, level one level data didn't tie to the business results. And I think the other one that comes to mind for me just happened recently in a conversation where I think when you end up with a metrics mirage, you can actually forget that training isn't always the right solution. We had a scenario where we were measuring the impact of training, and a couple things came out really clearly. Number one, the training was nearly non-existent. It wasn't measured and it wasn't regimented. So there's a little bit of an issue there, and our measurement figured that out entirely. What we also found out is that for the particular product line that we were looking at, that some of their top award-winning salespeople didn't want to sell it because there was a commission issue. And so no amount of training was going to change their behavior. So in a weird way, the metrics mirage of looking at, do we create training for them to take so that they can like it and so that we can say that they've completed it, wasn't going to change the behavior. We're actually just able to sit down and say, we don't necessarily think, yes, training might be a mess, but it may not be the solution that you're looking for. In that case, we're actually able to talk people out of training because there was another structural issue that a training evaluation was able to figure out. So again, I think the illusion of successful training without the business results to back it up leads to that mirage.
Yeah, that's great. There's an interesting corollary there between that metrics mirage and then keeping the blinders on, which I think is also with that example where people thought it was this problem. They think it's content, they think it's this, they think it's that. It's really interesting. So if those traditional metrics aren't telling the full story, what should folks be looking at?
Well, I think at the end of the day, how are they measuring the business in general? Like I love it. And I asked this question, if we dropped this report on the CEO's desk, would she care? Like, would she care? If we walked into the CEO and we dropped a report on her desk that said, our people love taking this class and we have 98% of our field go through it, would she care? And the reality is that's not how she's measured. That's not how the national sales director is measured, or the head of the business is measured, or the sales enablement folks are measured. So what are the business goals? Let's actually start there. And then let's design measurements in training that can get us there. And it's not as hard as it sounds. It's really not as hard as it sounds. Believe it or not, there's a number of times that we will sit down and talk to trainers and we will ask things like, do you have a copy of marketing's brand plan and what their goals are? And the right answer, what the right answer should be, I'll send it to you right now. And what we often hear is it'll take me a couple days to get it. Like, how are you measuring yourself against the business goals? And they have a general idea of what they are. But we really need to be tied into those business goals. And the key is then to start with the end in mind. What is the business problem we are fixing or solving or simply pouring gas on the fire? And we have to understand that, I think, before we can even have a really successful measurement strategy as a whole.
Love that. Yeah, love that. And in these types of webinars, I always like to make sure that we're talking about, okay, this is great, great information, great way to look at it, but how do we actually implement that approach? Can you talk about what you call the measurement playbook then?
Yeah, it's a pretty simple stepwise approach. The first off is you have to define the business outcomes. What is it that we are fixing? What is it that they can't no do or say today? What is the economic or financial outcome that we're trying to make sure? And we have to make sure we have strong stakeholder agreement on that.
Yep.
Secondly, we really need to understand what are the performance gaps? Like what is it that they cannot do today? And I'll take an obvious one. We're launching a new sales aid. We're launching some new data. It is really clear that if I am handing someone a new message or new data today, that they can't no, do, or say the moment we hand it to them. And there's a gap that we can help address. That's a really obvious gap. Where it starts to become a little bit more challenging is on behaviors. It starts to become a little bit more challenging on, new competitors and what their message is going to be. And so now you start to get into the nuances a little bit. The third is to take a spaced measurement approach. So it's not about measuring it once. Don't just certify them once and then let them run and gun, right? I think what we know about knowledge retention is that if you consistently both reinforce the learning and measure the learning, it results in significantly higher behavioral change and it results in significantly higher retention. And the third is then take that information and connect it to the business metrics. I mean, yes, we're all here talking about how successful this can be. And quite frankly, we can learn a lot from the things that failed as well. Like, let's stop doing that thing. Like that thing that didn't work, let's stop pretending like it did. And that becomes incredibly important. And I have seen a number of examples. There's one specific example that I can think of where by the result of doing this sort of measurement, admitting what worked, admitting what didn't, we were able to pick better modalities. We were able to show a business impact. We were able to build the case that there needed to be training, there needed to be some investment, and actually change strategy in some cases.
Love that. Yeah, and the spaced repetition from a learning perspective is something that probably a lot of folks on this webinar have heard, but from a spaced measurement perspective, that might be new to some. And I love that approach, just crucial in this piece. Can you walk us through, you mentioned an example. Can you walk us through an example of where we've used this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were working with a specialty pharmaceutical company. There was a total of there was a total of over 100 people that were measured. We were looking at this group to figure out what were the metrics that mattered. We were creating a benchmark. And what we found was really interesting. The first thing that we found is that the average score, the thing that we normally report, wasn't that bad. That the average score, really, we would have, like, if you were just looking at it, you'd check the box and say that looked really good. But when we started digging into those metrics, it looked really, really, really different. First off, we saw about 2/3 of the sales force was proficient. That's not all that uncommon in these sorts of assessments. The assessment was really hard. We made it hard on purpose. It had a variety of different types of questions. We like to use open answer questions with a standardized rubric, multiple selection questions. So again, this is not your true false. This is the product indication. These were really challenging questions. We found about 75% of the managers were proficient as measured. Again, these scores aren't outside the range. Looking at this, I go, okay, fine. A normal measurement, I go, okay, fine. We're about where we expected to be. But as we started to dig in a little bit deeper, and this was really where we found we're able to tie things back to the metrics that really matter. First off, they were struggling to grow market share. While the market was relatively stable, we found that the uh, information about the competitors, they were growing in some areas. And when you were able to compare how they did on questions, and sometimes multiple questions, so we can bucket questions and say, okay, this competitor, we had only 50% of the people got the question right, and it turned out to be the product that grew the most. And that now all of a sudden we're saying, okay, well, there may be a knowledge gap there. What we found was that of all the competitive questions, 50% of those had less than a proficient score. And there was this discussion like, hey, we've had some turnover. We bet you that the new people are going to do better than the people that have been here 10 years because they just went through training. Well, if you have the right tools, all we did is we just overlaid that data with tenure. And the hypothesis that that coming out of training would do better because they just learned some of this stuff than people that had been there 10 years turned out to be completely false. As it turned out, tenure was not a function of their knowledge. When we dug even deeper into the data, we were able to figure out that most people were able to do really well in one area. So they were proficient, they were found proficient because that one area bumped their score up, but they were pretty lacking in one or the other area. So, and this is where the modality gets into it. If we can go to the next slide. We're sitting down with sales leadership, and sales leadership says, competition has been a problem. We're going to have our managers coach to competition. That's not something we need to do another course on, that we don't need webinars. We don't need any of the other modalities. We're going to enable our managers. And we're able to pull up this data. And if you look on the far right side, the managers had a lower proficiency level than the reps. If you're asking your managers to coach to competitive knowledge, you're shopping for bread in a hardware store. You're not going to get what you need. This is a short snippet, Brett, of what turned out to be a 75 page deck, looking at the data in a number of ways, including actually looking at the financial performance of individual regions, areas, and representatives as compared to how they did on the quiz. So we're actually able to pinpoint not only, like we found questions that quite frankly, the field did awful on, but it didn't matter to the results. Like we could have spent a lot of time training on that, and it did not tie directly to the financial results that they were achieving. So I think that's an example where we look at the information. First off, we assess the information. We decide, we pre-examine what are the business results that matter. The most important one being addressing competitive pressures, growing our business, and figuring out where do we need to actually spend our time. With another thing being, listen, we have people coming out of new hire. They've been out of new hire 3 months, 9 months, and they don't know any more or less than people that have been here 10 years.
Yeah.
And what does that say? And so it is a really interesting analysis. I really appreciated learning this because it made us better trainers. And quite frankly, we were able to have a bigger business impact as a result.
Yeah. And what was the follow-up on this?
Great thing. So first off, this is step one.
Mm-hmm.
This is a benchmark measurement, and we had to have a place that we knew we were starting from. I think this is where a spaced learning approach becomes really important in those key targeted areas. It's not a one and done sort of thing. And quite frankly, it's not all e-learning. It's e-learning and coaching and pull through at the national sales meeting. There's these touch points. One of the things that we know is that traditional one and done learning, 30 days later, they're going to remember about 20% of it.
Yeah.
If we put in a spaced approach, if we're very systematic, we have it planned ahead of time and we're able to implement it, the end result is 90 days later, you can see retention rates 80, 90%. And are we measuring the right behaviors? Are we measuring the things that are really going to matter?
Yeah, it's such great information. It really is. Um, just kind of broaden that topic a little bit. When you look at the world of training, one of the things that I often see is that folks approach training for the impact of awareness. So they're training 30-minute Zoom calls, 4-hour long live sessions. As you mentioned, this time of year with national field meetings, people are brought together in big venues, tremendous amount of dollars spent to bring people together. But as you know, the focus of that type of training is really more about awareness, not a bad thing, but knowing that you're focusing on awareness as opposed to readiness is a really important piece of that.
Brett, yes, I think that is absolutely critical. It's one of the things that when we first started having discussions, you started talking about readiness, and I was completely on the same page. I'd love it if you could just say a little bit more about how you define readiness, knowing that you're working with people like in the military, where it's truly a life or death situation if they don't know that information. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. If we had one of the pilots that we work with here, they would give an even better explanation for readiness than I certainly could, because as you said, it's life and death. They breathe it every day. Military readiness is essentially the gold standard, and they literally depend on having the confidence that they have that right knowledge at the point of need. To me, that's what readiness is all about. Confidence that you have the right knowledge at the point of need. And that really breaks down into those three parts. What is the required knowledge? That's different. You know, in a fighter pilot, it's one thing. For an MSL, it's another. It depends on the role, what that required knowledge is. And that's an important part of planning learning, is what is truly that required knowledge? What has to be there? And then at the point of need, that's the second piece of this. You have to have that knowledge when you need it. In these days, the amount of time we get to talk to a prospect or we get to deal with a situation has been constricted. And, you know, it's really gotten worse, especially in the sales world over the last 10 to 20 years. The supply and demand problem there is a major problem. The demand for people's time to talk to them about other things that you might want them to do and keeps increasing. There's people out there, I'm getting, 10, 15 messages a day about things that I should buy and ways that I should do things. But the supply of time, it doesn't change. It's the same. And so it's a really tiny increment of time. So at the point of need, you've got to take advantage of it. And then confidence. I think this is a piece that I really love about the Learn to Win platform, is that ability to measure confidence that you have in a particular answer on a question or a particular piece of learning. Because if you don't have confidence, you're going to hesitate at that point of need. And, on the sports field, that's something obviously we saw in our athletic world. Certainly, we don't want to see that in the Department of Defense, but even in your pharma sales and field teams, you don't want to see that lack of confidence. They've got to have confidence that they have the knowledge. If they do, significantly better outcomes. So you combine all three of those together, works really well from a readiness perspective.
And I actually want to add on to that,
Yep.
because one of the things that we've seen as we've started using the tool to measure confidence of knowledge and of approach, it's not only that we don't want people that lack confidence. Like we see people that know the information, but they lack confidence. What scares me more, and sometimes we see it when there are therapeutic areas where they hire people with a lot of experience, they are very confident and they are wrong. They are confidently incorrect. And that's almost, as a trainer, that almost scares me more, because now I got to undo some of that learning. But I think you said it really, really well.
Yeah, it's interesting how much that is a metric that matters right there. If they're
Yeah.
confident and wrong, that's that'll matter. Great discussion. We could probably go on with this topic for quite a while, but even when we're saying this, there's clear benefits here to taking the approach you've talked about, to taking a learning and a readiness approach that is more in line with modern adult learning approaches and modern adult learning science, but still you see organizations struggling to implement those approaches. In your experience, what are the barriers that you've seen that prevent those organizations from moving forward?
Yeah, I think there are probably four that I can think of that are pretty universal. The first one is awareness. First off, a lot of us don't come from a training and development background. We're accidental trainers. I know that's how I got into the career. And so I was self-taught on some of this stuff until I saw other courses. So just awareness, that's number one. Some people don't think it's part of their remit. I would tend to disagree. Number two is, quite frankly, the tools or the technology. There's maybe a lack of awareness or a lack of investment in having the right tools. The third is actually surprising. There are people that know how to do it, they have the right tools, but they don't report it. They are getting the information for themselves, but they don't share it. And that leads to the fourth problem, which is a lack of consistency. We do it once, we take the benchmark, we never ask the same questions again. We never look and see. We make a decision based on a point in time, and then we don't change anything that we want to measure at a later point. So I think those are the four key barriers that I think we run into with different organizations pretty consistently.
Yeah, let me add one more to that, which is the investment that a lot of these organizations have made into the training approach that they have. They've got an LMS with course after course after course that they've developed over time, which is a significant investment. And to think about the pain of taking that, it's really gets into one of the areas that I'm really passionate about, which is, you know, everybody says it, everybody's talking about it, artificial intelligence, AI. But it's such a game changer with that one particular part of the problem. What we're doing with AI, very excited about. We're running out of time. I'm not going to have much to discuss there, but it's certainly a game changer where instead of just having a very simple trained model that is going to output this kind of lowest common denominator of an answer, we're taking an approach where we can customize that answer and that output to an organization, to a therapeutic area, to a particular role in that therapeutic area. So you're getting that 70, 80% content developed through AI. Now, certainly one of the biggest concerns there is security. This group is probably thinking that already, and we absolutely think it too. Our security is good for the DoD, as I talked about, impact levels 3 and 4. And I think that says a lot of good things about what you can do. Now, we will have some organizations that will just flat out say, no, we're not going to, but I think that'll change over time. And I'm really excited about where that's going to head in the coming years.
You know, Brett, I know we've only got a few minutes left, and there was a question that popped up from the chat. Thank you all for chatting. I don't know if we'll get a chance to answer every question. In fact, I doubt it, but there was a really interesting question, and I want to answer it if that's okay.
Go for it.
Number one, there was a question related to are the metrics Mirage, are they only level 1 and level 2? So just for everyone's knowledge, level 1 is whether or not they like the course. Level 2 is whether or not they retain the information. Level 3 is whether or not I changed my behavior. And level 4 is as a result of my behavior change, did the customer change their behavior? So is it just level 3 and level 4? And the answer is no, no. And what I mean by that is that I have heard organizations say, we need representatives to ask more questions. And we've watched them measure whether or not representatives are asking more questions. And it didn't result in more sales. It didn't result in the behavior change at level 4. So what ends up happening, and if you really want to get to it, like the ultimate goal would be the Phillips level of ROI. So it's level 5, kind of somewhat related called, I guess. It's not really a Kirkpatrick level. But the point being is that no, people will still look at level 3 and level 4 things that don't ultimately drive the business. Another classic example is you change a prescriber's behavior where they start prescribing way more of your product for patients that have much lower margins. You know, all of a sudden they start using a lot for Medicaid patients, and the product volume is shooting up, but the company's financial performance is shooting down relative to their expectations. And it's because what they were trying to achieve didn't drive the business that they wanted. I don't know if that makes any sense, but we see it all the time, still at level 3 and level 4 behaviors.
Yeah, great answer. Let me grab one more. I think we got 1 minute left. I'm going to go really quick on this one. Specifics on the approach to measurement. So from a platform perspective, Learn to Win is providing some of the tool level, technology level capabilities to do that measurement. I think the real answer to that question, though, is the combination of what Aquinas is doing with their approach, some of the things that Matthew's talked about today, and the Learn to Win tool really give you the basis to how you should approach that measurement. And then it just comes down to a conversation with you. Where are your problems? What does matter to your business? Those types of things. And then we back into those measurements, and then we back into the technology around how to create them and capture them. I think that's it. We are out of time. I appreciate everyone. If we've got questions in the chat, we will certainly try to get back to you on those as well. But thank you very much for your time. I hope you got something very positive out of it. And if you would like to reach out to us, our contact information is on the slide here. And thanks again.